Oh, fine, whatever. Let's put my sweatshirt on. Alrighty. Today I'm going to read There's Always Something in the Woods by Gabino, Iglesias, and that is in Other Terrors, an inclusive anthology, multiple authors. Let's see if my dog wants to join me again. She might not. Either way, I hope you enjoy this story. Carlos looked scared. He kept looking out the small window over the kitchen sink at the darkness outside, and running his hands down the side of his jeans as if trying to dry sticky sweat that refused to leave his palms. Chill the fuck out, man, said Ernesto. Carlos looked at him. A brief flash of anger creased his brow before melting back into the mask of concern he'd worn since they'd gotten together to plan this little debacle 2 weeks ago. In her silent corner, Amanda observed. She had half a mind to slip out somehow and let them deal with whatever came their way. It wasn't much of a plan, especially considering Ernesto had the car keys in his pocket. Plus, she'd have to make her way to the car through woods she didn't know. Despite all that, getting the hell out sounded like paradise. She almost didn't mind having to go back and find a new kitchen gig at some other strip joint. There were plenty of those in Austin. Carlos could find construction work like he'd done so many times before, or he could work landscaping again. He was smart and a quick learner, so those jobs never felt fair to Amanda, but he had no papers. Luckily, he'd never had a hard time finding a job. Amanda knew most business owners love cheap labor more than they hate immigrants. There's something out there, said Carlos. His voice was strained. The last word had escaped his mouth like a snake slithering between clenched teeth. He was used to keeping his cool, so losing it was making everything worse. There's always something in the woods, said Ernesto. In this case, it's your own fear, man. Mellow out. Nah, I saw something on our way here, said Carlos. We were being followed. We were being stalked. Bullshit, you're just paranoid. It's not nonsense. Ask Amanda. She saw it too. Amanda had gotten comfortable in her dark spot opposite the cabin store. Her back was pressed against the rear left corner of the cabin. She had her knees up against her chest. Between her legs and the two walls, she felt somewhat protected on all sides. The men kept looking out the window over the sink at their phones and at each other, so she felt invisible for a while. She liked the feeling. Ernesto turned to Amanda. The little light that came from the window reflected off the sweat on his forehead. The beads came in part from it being Texas in the middle of July and in part from his nerves. Men rely on their bodies to communicate strength, but their bodies betray them in many ways. Biology and chemistry are awful liars. Did you see anything, Mandy? She hated the nickname. Ernesto had used it to bother her for so long, and now he couldn't stop unless he concentrated on it. He seemed to enjoy bothering her, but they were good friends. She had always made friends with outcasts, and Ernesto, a Salvadoran immigrant with no papers who escaped his country because a lot of bad people wanted him dead, was definitely an outcast. He'd also been Carlos's best friend since before Amanda met him, and that meant something to her, as if it made them family somehow. I saw something. I have no idea what it was, said Amanda. See, I fucking told you. I saw it on our way here and saw it again a couple minutes ago when you were in the bathroom. It was moving out there right beyond the trees. It was big, not wide, more long than anything. Anyway, we should get the hell out of here. Enough! Ernesto's voice cut through the room like a sickle. Amanda had been brought up by a father who liked to raise his voice and hit anyone who yelled back, so she was no stranger to explosive anger. She dealt with angry men her whole life. Their testosterone outbursts didn't surprise or intimidate her. She was always ready to strike first if she felt a man was about to go from screaming to hitting. The car is almost a quarter mile from here, said Ernesto. The guy who's going to come pick up the horse will be in here in a couple hours. We're all about to get a nice chunk of cash, okay? All you have to do is clunk. They all looked up. Something had landed on the roof of the cabin. What the hell was that? As soon as the words left her mouth, Amanda felt like the dumbest character in one of those found footage films Carlos liked so much. She wished she could take the words back. She wished she could take the whole night back. Maybe a pine cone or some shit fell on the roof, said Ernesto. Come on, man, said Carlos. You know that was too damn loud to be a pine cone. I don't care what it is. Ernesto's body language told a different story. He turned and looked out the window again. When he turned back, the anger that had contorted his face a minute ago had been replaced by a crease in his brow and a tension in his lips that spelled anxiety. What do you think you saw, Amanda? The use of her full name meant more than his inquiry. Ernesto was serious. She didn't want to freak him out, but lying was out of the question. They were somewhere outside Fredericksburg, in a hunter's cabin that belonged to Ernesto's uncle. They were surrounded by wilderness and relatively far from the car. Ernesto said they had to leave the car hidden in case someone reported it, whatever that meant. They'd left his Subaru somewhat hidden behind some bushes on the dirt road that led to the cabin. It was a dirt road they'd gotten on after turning off 290 a few miles after passing Johnson City's deserted Main Street. Being far from everything she knew made Amanda feel vulnerable. Honesty seemed like the best option. After all, she had seen something out there. I don't know what I saw. It was a bit after we left the car. We were coming up a little hill and my foot caught on something, so I stopped for a second to check my shoe and rub my ankle. The moonlight was coming through trees to my left and I saw something move there. It was fast and slanky. That's all I know. Exactly, said Carlos. Fast and fucking big. Thunk. Their eyes once again flew to the roof. This time the sound had been even louder. Carlos inhaled and kept talking with his eyes jumping from the roof to the window and back to the roof. What I saw looked like a really tall man with impossibly long arms. Hold on, man, said Ernesto. Amanda, I want you to be sure. This isn't the time for games. That Carlos here is freaked out is normal, but if you think there's something out there... I'm not playing around, Ernesto, she said. Fuck. Silence invaded the cabin, a heavy, tense, tangible presence between them. Amanda pulled her knees closer to her chest and remembered something strange she'd experienced back home, something she didn't normally talk about, but that struck her as a palliative for the current situation, something less ominous than the current silence. It was also as strange as what she'd seen in the woods. When I was about 12 years old, she began. Then she stopped and crossed her legs in front of her so she could place her elbows on them, lean forward, and push her face out of the darkness that pooled in her corner of the room. My dad would sometimes take us somewhere on Sundays, to make us forget about whatever horrible shit he'd done to us the previous 6 days. And one time he took us to El Yunque, a famous rainforest. As always, it was raining up there. That's what you usually get in a rainforest, right? We didn't do much. Cook some hot dogs on one of those covered huts with a concrete table and a dirty grill that can be found all over the place. Anyway, point is, we got tired of the rain, so we waited for it to turn into a drizzle and ran back to the car. I sat in the front because those curvy mountain roads always made my mom nauseous, so she preferred to ride in the back with my little brother. Amanda stopped talking. Both men were listening to her. She had their attention. That meant no arguing for a while. Too bad there wasn't much more to the story. We rounded a curve in the road and saw something run in front of the car. My dad hit the brakes. We were going slow because of the rain and the shitty, dangerous roads up there, so the car stopped pretty quickly and didn't fishtail or anything. My dad looked at me and I could see the question in his eyes. He knew I'd seen the thing that had run in front of the car. It had been running on 2 legs. He put the car in park, threw his door open, and got out without a word. I saw him walk up to some greenery right where the creature had disappeared. Then he stopped. Way he was standing there, I knew he was seeing something. I opened my door and went to him. My mom yelled something about not being stupid and staying in the car, but I didn't care. When I reached my dad, his face was all scrunched up like he was seeing something disgusting. I was going to ask him what was wrong when he lifted his finger slowly and said, "Look right in front of me, next to that patch of mud." There was a lot of green, but the rain had come down hard and there were patches of mud here and there. I looked right in front of him and saw nothing, so I kept looking, and then I saw it. Carlos and Ernesto had turned their bodies away from the window and were staring at Amanda. Carlos had his hands in his pockets. It was something he did when he was nervous. Amanda normally found it endearing, but in this context she hated it. Ernesto had his thumbs hooked on his belt. He looked at her as if waiting for an answer to an incriminating question. She continued. Imagine a big gray frog walking on 2 legs, and that's more or less what we saw. I mean, it was slightly more humanoid, but if you saw it, a frog would be the first thing that came to mind. The head was round and it had huge black eyes. The mouth was like a slit and its arms were long and shiny. It looked wet but not wet because it had been raining, more of a slimy kind of wet. It took a step to the right, still on 2 legs, and then bolted, moving deeper into the plant on the side of the road. It moved just like a person would. The men stayed quiet. She was done. Telling them about getting back in the car would have been dumb. She knew a story was over when the good stuff was over. "That's it?" asked Ernesto. "Yeah." "So what are you trying to say? You think there's a tall gray frog out there?" No, all I'm saying is that there's weird shit out there, and sometimes you see something you can't explain. That's it. The gray frog was tiny, and now that I'm an adult, I know the only reason it scared the shit out of me is because I didn't know what it was. Same now. There's a thing out there I've never seen before, but that doesn't mean it's dangerous or anything, you know? Could be a diseased animal or something. No, Carlos said. No, this isn't the same. You saw some weird animal, some mutated frog or some shit. This is different. Carlos walked to the table and grabbed one of the white pieces that were scattered on it. Look at this shit, he said, holding up what looked like a curved, sharpened bone. This is a tooth. A huge fucking tooth. They're all teeth. I've never seen teeth like this before, and I'm sure they belong to whatever is out there. The thing that was following us and trying to stay out of sight. You saw it, Amanda. Amanda knew what he meant. This lanky thing on two legs had moved from tree to tree with purpose and speed. The memory of its long humanoid limbs swinging in the darkness sent a shiver down her spine. It was obviously trying to stay out of sight, but it never stayed put. It had followed them. She'd said nothing because jogging through the woods with stolen drugs wasn't the best time to entertain some things like that. Now they were locked here with the drugs and some huge teeth from a strange creature until someone came to buy them, and the thing was out there, apparently throwing rocks at the cabin. Ernesto looked out the window again, his brown eyes scanning the darkness outside. Whatever's out there will probably go away eventually, he said. We don't need to go outside anyway. Carlos took a step back and pointed at Ernesto. You motherfucker, you knew about this. What are you talking about, man? Asked Ernesto. You just went from there's nothing out there to whatever is out there will go away eventually. So? I've known you, 15 years? Give or take. What? You never give in so easily, said Carlos. Amanda's story didn't convince you. This isn't El Yunque. You knew something before we came here, or at least you suspected something, didn't you? I'd heard something about the area, but that's... Carlos exclaimed. He turned and paced away from the window. Amanda knew that anger made him abandon English. He was a good man, but the dark past inside him could turn into violence if left unchecked. Then why the hell did you bring us here? Asked Amanda. She tried to push away the image of the figure walking through the trees, but now she couldn't. The memory of that amphibian thing on two legs had somehow magnified her current fear. It was the only place I knew that wasn't near other people. We stole about $100,000 worth of horse from that woman. I wanted a safe place, far away from everything. There's only that dirt road coming here, so it's easy to see anyone approaching. It struck me as the perfect place, okay? And it's not like what I heard sounded completely true, you know? So what did you hear? Ernesto looked at the window again and opened his mouth, but a sound from the left side of the cabin made them all jump. It made Amanda think someone or something had slammed its body against the wall. Something to her left fell. The sound of glass shattering made her jump. She looked at the floor next to her, a newspaper article. She picked it up by the light brown frame and shook off some of the broken glass. She had to bring it close to her face to make out the headline, Hill Country Creature Strikes Again. The first line said something about mutilated cows. She stopped reading and stood up. She took her phone out of her pocket and turned on the flashlight. The wall was covered in newspaper clippings like the one she was holding, all local, all mentioning dead animals. A presence next to her made Amanda jump again. It was Carlos. His eyes were wide open as he scanned the wall. Carlos snapped out of it a second later and moved towards Ernesto. What the fuck is all that? He asked while pointing at the wall. If you know something, tell us now. I'm serious. Ernesto inhaled as if bracing for some kind of invisible impact. You knew about this, didn't you? Amanda sounded sad instead of angry. Yeah, but it's just stories, you know? Weird shit folks like my uncle talk about. That motherfucker is obsessed with it. That's why we could use this place. He won't spend the night here even if you paid him. Old lady stories that... Fuck that, said Carlos. Tell us what you know now. Ernesto took another big breath before he started talking. Buddy of mine who grew up right here in Hill Country told me a story about this part of the woods. His grandparents owned a farm out here or some shit. They had a bunch of acres somewhere nearby. Anyway, he said there was a thing living in their barn, a strange, tall creature with a big head and large black eyes that hid in the woods during the day and came into the barn to sleep or something at night. Now, my buddy Jake, he didn't hit the bottle or nothing. He was a regular dude. I had no reason not to believe him. He always told the same story time and again, too, which I've learned isn't something most liars do. You know, folks who lie all the time usually tell a bunch of lies and they get them all mixed up, but when someone always tells the same story, it's probably clunk. Something landed on the roof again. This time it sounded even harder. That pine cone must have been the size of a cinder block, said Amanda with no humor in her voice. Tell your story, Ernesto. What the hell is out there? Should we be on our way back to the car? Ernesto took another deep breath while still looking at the ceiling. Right. Anyway, Jake told me more than once how he refused to go out to the barn at night. One time his grandpa sent him out there to get some shit, and he says he walked in and saw the thing in a corner. A long humanoid creature with thin arms and a very large head. Spooked the shit out of him. He told his grandpa and then repeated his story to his mom the next day. They said he'd seen the shadow of a tree or maybe a bird. He was a kid, you know? It was dark and all that. They dismissed him. Can't blame them. He was a kid talking about monsters, so I'm sure any of us would have done the same thing. Thing is, Jake kept an eye out and saw the creatures a few more times, either leaving the barn or walking along the edge of the tree line behind it. It was always a glimpse, you know? Like, enough to know it was there and that it was something weird and shaped like a thin, big-headed person, but not clear enough to actually know what the fuck he was looking at. Just like the thing Amanda and I saw out there, interjected Carlos. Yeah, something like that, said Ernesto. Long story short, Jake's room was on the second floor right across from his grandparents' bedroom. His mom left him with them all the time because she worked night shifts at a 24-hour diner right down the road in Fredericksburg. Point is, Jake's bedroom had a window and he could see the barn from it, so he became obsessed, staying up at all hours of the night trying to get a better look at the damn thing that he was sure lived in the barn or in the woods around it. He never saw it again, but he knew it was out there. Anytime he brought it up, his grandparents or his mom would joke about his imagination and laugh at him, so he stopped talking about it. Then when he was almost sure the thing had vanished or died somewhere out there, he and his grandpa started finding mutilated animals out on their property and in the nearby woods. Started with a few cats, dogs, possums, and raccoons. Jake told his grandpa it had to be the creature. Grandpa told him to shut the fuck up about the creature already. Animals die all the time. Disease, other animals attack them, people poison them, they eat some shit they shouldn't have eaten, whatever. Old man had a point, although none of that explained why the animals were all messed up or why some of them had been mutilated in weird ways. Anyway, before they could figure out if there was another animal out there attacking dogs and cats, they started finding dead deer. Then they were doing one of their rounds and found a mountain lion missing its head. Nothing out there preys on mountain lions. Grandpa kept up his bullshit explanations, but Jake could tell he no longer believed a single word he said. Also, they realized no animal would scavenge the bodies if they left them around. It was like they were poisoned or something. Jake had a good relationship with his grandpa, and he kept telling him that he believed the creature in the barn was responsible. His grandpa told him to stop watching movies that were rotting his brain. I guess things stayed the same for a while, but then on a night like any other, Jake was in bed and heard a sound like someone screaming far away, a screech that woke him up. He kept hearing it as his brain woke up for real. It wouldn't stop. Jake was facing the door and the sound was coming from outside, so he turned around, thinking he was gonna get up and take a look out the window. But when he turned, he saw the thing right outside his window. He said the head was dark and had no hair or feathers on it, and its toothless round mouth was open. The screeching was coming from it. The thing had black eyes that were larger than anything Jake had ever seen. It watched as Jake moved, and instead of vanishing, it slapped a hand on the glass. Not a paw or a talon, a fucking hand. Jake ran into his grandparents' bedroom and dragged them both to his room, but the thing had gone by the time they came in. Jake was so freaked out about the thing somehow hovering right outside, peeking into his window, that he convinced his grandpa to grab his rifle and try to hunt the creature down. After a lot of bitching and moaning, his grandfather finally agreed. The next night the rock that just landed on the roof of the cabin was so big that it was followed by a crack and a moan from the wood. "We need to get the fuck out of here right now," said Carlos. "If there's something out there you want to risk a half-mile jog in the woods with it behind you?" Carlos's silence was eloquent, and it was all the answer Ernesto needed. "So, did they see it?" asked Amanda. "What?" "Your story. Jake. Did they see anything in the barn?" "Right. The window. They waited by the window, but they didn't see the creature. Jake said they should try again, and his grandpa said no, but then they went out the next morning and found 3 dead chickens outside the chicken coop, their bodies torn to pieces by something that drank all their blood and ate away at the soft bits. The dead chickens made Jake's grandpa angry, so he said they'd spend one more night dozing off in front of the window. Well, around 1 in the morning, right before they were about to pass out, they saw movement to the left of the barn. Something was exiting the woods and making its way to the barn. Jake's grandpa told him to wait in the house and went out there with his rifle and a flashlight. According to Jake, he opened fire as soon as he walked into the damn barn. Then Jake heard the screeching sound from far away and then a second shot. The shots woke up Jake's grandma. She grabbed him by the arm and dragged him downstairs. They took another flashlight from the kitchen and ran out there. They approached the barn quietly and scared shitless, obviously. They couldn't find Jake's grandpa at first. There was blood on the floor and the rifle was there, slightly bent as if some giant had tried to break it, but they couldn't find anyone. They hollered and looked and then hollered some more. Finally, they called the cops and 2 guys came out and helped them. About half an hour later, one of the pigs had the brilliant idea of shining a light upward. That's when they found Jake's grandpa. The man had been attacked by something or someone, and then that something or someone had pulled him all the way up to an exposed beam near the roof of the barn. They had to get firefighters with big ladders to get the body down. The way Jake told the story, his grandpa's body had been viciously attacked. Someone had punched a hole through the left of his body. He said you could see his ribs and his lungs. There was also a large cut between his neck and shoulder that made the cops think some crazy killer with a machete was out there in the woods. Here's the kicker. They never found a weapon or anyone to pin the murder on. Jake kept the article that came out about it in the local newspaper in his wallet. It was short and vague as fuck, but it said that the man had been viciously attacked by an unknown assailant. That's fancy talk for seriously fucked up, you know. I know it said that because Jake would show it to me all the time, or at least whenever we drank together. Anyway, that happened a couple miles from here. Ernesto stopped talking. He looked deflated. Amanda felt like he'd given them a lot of information, but other than use it as an excuse to tell them to run for the car, she had no idea what to do with it. We need to leave. We're not safe here. Carlos wasn't panicking, but he'd taken the first step down that road. He'd been on edge for 2 weeks. He'd been the one with the big idea. He knew the woman who ran the Yellow Rose, where Amanda worked in the kitchen, not as a dancer, was using the strip joint as a cover for her drug business. He planned everything. Quick hit, from the inside, no killing, grab the stuff and vanish. It was dangerous, but Carlos was always worrying about money. He had no papers, which made things harder, and Amanda hadn't finished college and had a thick accent, which made every human resources person that interviewed her smile, and then give the job to someone else. They were both desperate, and when Ernesto said he could set the sale up with a friend of his cousin in San Antonio, they decided to go for it. Poverty is often the mother of bad decisions. Now here they were, and they weren't willing to wait for the buyer because something tall with long arms was out there throwing rocks at the cabin. Big rocks. Anger washed over Amanda. This wasn't fair. The plan was supposed to get them out of their hole. Maybe she and Carlos could use the money to get married. That would be an easy path to citizenship. Maybe we should crash. The rock was larger than a melon, but was more cube-shaped than round. It fell through the ceiling and landed with a loud thud a few feet from where Carlos stood. Amanda found herself on her feet with no memory of standing up. Carlos was about to speak when something else landed on the roof. That's it, Ernesto said, his hand flying back to the gun tucked away under his black t-shirt, where the screech was as loud as a siren. Their shoulders went up. Amanda covered her ears. Carlos looked up as if he expected a banshee to drop down on him from the cabin ceiling. Then the window exploded. Glass shards flew into the cabin. Amanda shielded her face. Carlos jumped away. Ernesto screamed. A long, dark thing came through the busted window. It looked like a cross between a human arm and a branch covered in rotting muscles. The thin hand at the end of it had fingers that were at least a foot long. There were more than 5 of them. They quickly wrapped themselves around Ernesto's head and shoulders. The thing outside pulled back with surprising speed. Amanda saw Ernesto standing there and then saw the bottom of his black boots as he flew out the window. The screech moved away and ceased. Ernesto's screams replaced a deafening shriek for a second and then stopped abruptly. Carlos ran across the room and held Amanda's arms. You okay? Amanda didn't know how to reply to that. What the fuck was that? No idea. We need to get in the bathroom or something. Let's go. No, I went when we got here. There's a huge window there right over the shower. Fuck. Let's run for it. What? Vamonos, Amanda. I think I could get us back to the car. If not, I can at least get us to the road. Ernesto had the keys. Carlos's face crumbled. And the gun. Fuck. Amanda saw him move toward the door, stop, and turn. He was lost. She had to save him. Let's run for it. You sure you know how to make it back to the road? Yeah. Carlos ran to the small kitchen table and grabbed the 3 sandwich bags full of small white heroin packets. Then he stepped back and looked at the window. The sound of insects was coming from the woods. Amanda knew they would stay there if she didn't start moving, so she did. As soon as she opened the door, Carlos told her to wait. Look around first. They looked around. Darkness and trees, bright stars up above. Nothing else. Amanda imagined a huge dark mouth with long, jagged teeth covered in Ernesto's blood. She was repulsed and scared, but hoped the thing was busy eating. Let's do this, she said. They were about 80 feet from the cabin and right where the woods started looking like real wilderness and not the kind you get around places where there are people when they heard the screech. They started running. Adrenaline rode Amanda's veins. She felt the ground was coming up to meet her feet with too much force, as if it were punishing her for trying to run as fast as she could. The pain made her think about her father. It reminded her of running away to the States. It reminded her that she was here because she'd made some bad decisions. The screech got louder. The eerie, high-pitched crescendo came at them like a threat, an awful promise wrapped around a single deafening note. The screech stopped. Carlos had fallen behind, and Amanda heard him breathing like a scared, wounded animal. The desperation in his breathing, the fear in every frantic inhalation, jabbed at Amanda's heart. Something moved near them. Carlos yelled. A sandwich bag full of heroin flew past Amanda's head, the plastic catching slivers of moonlight as it twirled by. Then there was a loud crunch, and Carlos's scream turned into a wet moan. Amanda dug deep and found nothing. Fear will inject your system with adrenaline, but not for long. It wasn't fair. Nothing in her life had been fair. She deserved better. Carlos deserved better. She was tired of being poor. She was tired of being a brown woman. She was tired of angry men. Amanda refused to look back. She doubted the thing behind her would follow her into the middle of the road. All she had to do was make it there. An invisible knife dug into her side. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her head. Bad decisions bring bad consequences. She pushed the voice out. Her heartbeat filled the space. She had done what she had to get to a fucking chance in life. Now she was running. It was the only thing that mattered. The screech came back, a far-off siren. It came closer quickly. Amanda choked on a sob. Her body was giving up. Her calves were on fire. Her lungs were begging for mercy. The screech became so loud it hurt her ears. Her right leg went up and found no ground when it came down. Amanda was in the air. A blur of hard darkness covered her face. The screech stopped. The scream caught in her throat lacked the oxygen it needed to be born. Her body turned sideways. Immense pressure brimmed right under her chest, followed by a loud crunch. Pain became the world. This wasn't fair. All they'd wanted was a break, a bit of cash, a fucking opportunity to dig themselves out of the hole they'd been in all their lives. Darkness came, absolute and cold. It wasn't fair. Well, that's the end of that one. I'm a little bummed by the ending. I was kind of hoping for a happy ending, but you never really can expect that in horror. But I do want to let you know that I skipped some of the Spanish words in here because I do not know much Spanish. I am actually planning to learn Spanish, so maybe in the future I'll be able to do that, but for today I just didn't want to completely butcher the language. So that is that, and if you want to read that, once again, it's an Other Terrors, an inclusive anthology.